12:23 in the morning. A car is speeding through a Paris tunnel. Inside, a woman is bleeding. Cameras are still flashing outside the windows. She doesn't know it yet, but in 20 minutes, the whole world will stop. Her name was Diana, and this was never supposed to be how her story ended. 16 years earlier, nobody knew that name the way the world would come to know it. She was just a shy 19-year-old girl, working at a nursery school, folding tiny sweaters and wiping tiny noses. She came from money, yes, old money. Her family had lived near the royals for generations, in a grand house just down the road from the Queen's own estate. But money never bought her what she wanted most: a normal home, with parents who stayed together. Her mother left when Diana was 6, just packed up and walked out the door. Diana used to say she remembered standing in the driveway, listening to the gravel crunch under the car tires, and thinking her mother was never coming back. She was right. That kind of loss doesn't just disappear. It hides, it waits. And for Diana, it would come back louder than she ever imagined, dressed up in a wedding gown 25 feet long. Because when Prince Charles came looking for a bride, Diana looked perfect on paper. Young, sweet, untouched by scandal. She had never even had a serious boyfriend before him. Nobody in the palace really asked what she wanted. They just needed someone the country would love, and love her they did, almost instantly. Charles was 32. Diana was 19. They had spent barely 13 hours alone together before he proposed. Diana said yes, before he'd even finished the sentence. She told a friend afterward that she felt like she was signing up to be a fairy tale. She just didn't know yet whose fairy tale it really was. 750 million people around the world tuned in to watch her marry into the British royal family. Bells rang across London. Children got the day off school. Shops closed. Streets filled with strangers hugging each other, crying happy tears for a girl they'd never met. It was, everyone agreed, a fairy tale. But 3 weeks before that wedding, Diana found a bracelet. It wasn't meant for her. It was engraved with 2 letters that weren't hers. A private gift from Charles to another woman, one he had loved long before Diana ever entered the picture. Her name was Camilla. Diana confronted him. Charles didn't deny it. He simply said the relationship was over. She believed him, because what else could a 19-year-old do 3 weeks from marrying a future king in front of the entire planet? She walked down that aisle anyway. She smiled anyway. And somewhere behind that smile, a very different story was already beginning. Life inside the palace was nothing like what she'd imagined. The rooms were grand, but they were cold. There were rules for everything: how to sit, how to wave, who to speak to and when, even how loudly you were allowed to laugh in public. Diana was young and full of feeling, and the palace didn't know what to do with feeling. She struggled to eat. She struggled to sleep. She would later admit, in her own words, that she once threw herself down a staircase while pregnant, desperate for someone, anyone, to notice how much pain she was in. Nobody came running. The family carried on as if nothing had happened. The Queen, she said, would look at her with pity, but never with real understanding. Charles, most nights, was somewhere else entirely. It's easy now to look at old photographs and only see the jewelry, the gowns, the smiles for the cameras. But behind almost every one of those photographs was a young woman slowly disappearing inside a life she never chose. And yet, something in Diana refused to vanish completely. She had 2 sons now, William and Harry, and something about becoming a mother seemed to wake a different part of her. Unlike almost every royal before her, Diana insisted on raising them herself, day to day, taking them to school in the family car instead of sending them with staff, taking them to amusement parks and McDonald's like any other mother in England. She wanted them to know a world outside palace walls, even if she herself was still trapped behind them. She started making choices nobody expected from a princess. In 1987, at a hospital in London, she visited a ward full of AIDS patients. At a time when most of the world still believed you could catch the disease from a single touch, doctors wore gloves around these patients. Family members sometimes refused to visit. Diana walked in, sat on the edge of a dying man's bed, and held his bare hand in hers. No gloves, no hesitation. That one photograph did more to fight the fear and shame around AIDS than a decade of government health campaigns. Years later, dressed in a visor and body armor, Diana walked out into an active minefield in Angola. Real landmines, buried and unmarked, the kind that had already taken arms and legs and lives from ordinary villagers. One wrong step, and there would be no royal wedding highlight reel, no fairy tale ending, just silence. She kept walking anyway. Cameras captured every step. It wasn't a stunt. It was a statement. The world's most photographed woman was choosing, deliberately, to stand where the cameras usually feared to go, beside the people everyone else had forgotten. Within months, that single walk helped push forward an international treaty banning landmines. A princess in a visor had done what years of diplomats and paperwork couldn't. The palace never quite knew what to do with her. She was becoming something bigger than the role they had given her, and the more the world loved her, the more the palace seemed to pull away. By the early 90s, the marriage had completely fallen apart in public view. Interviews, book excerpts, leaked phone calls. The entire country was picking sides at dinner tables, the same way families argue over a divorce that's happening 2 doors down. In 1995, Diana sat down for a television interview watched by over 20 million people and looked straight into the camera and said the words that would follow her forever. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. No royal had ever spoken like that. Not once, not in 1,000 years of British history. The palace was furious. The public was captivated. And Diana, for the first time, felt like people were finally hearing the truth, in her own words, not the palace's carefully written version of it. The divorce came a year later, in 1996. She lost the title, Her Royal Highness. She lost the security detail that had followed her for over a decade, the same detail that had once stood between her and danger. What she didn't lose, what she could never lose, was the attention of every camera in the world. If anything, without the crown protecting her, the chase only got worse. Photographers followed her to lunch, to the gym, to her son's school gates. They followed her on holiday, hiding in bushes with long lenses. They followed her into cars, onto boats, through hotel lobbies, sometimes a dozen motorbikes deep, engines roaring behind her for miles through the streets of London and Paris. For 16 years, Diana had been running from flashing lights. She was about to find out what happened when she couldn't outrun them anymore. On the night of August 30th, 1997, Diana was in Paris with a man named Dodi Fayed. They had spent the evening at the Ritz Hotel, trying, like always, to enjoy one quiet dinner without an audience. It didn't work. Photographers gathered outside, waiting for hours. A little after midnight, they left through a back entrance, hoping to slip away unseen one more time. It didn't work either. The motorbikes found them within minutes. The driver, trying to lose the cameras, sped up. And inside a tunnel along the Seine, going far too fast, the car lost control and slammed into a concrete pillar. It's 12:23 in the morning. The car has crashed. Diana is alive, but badly hurt. For a few minutes, before the ambulance arrives, before the world finds out, she is still just a woman in pain, in the back of a wrecked car, in a country far from home. Paramedics work on her for over an hour at the scene, then again in the ambulance, moving slowly through Paris traffic to give her body a chance to stabilize. By the time doctors get her to the hospital, it's already too late. At 4 a.m. Paris time, on August 31, 1997, Princess Diana was pronounced dead. She was 36 years old. What happened next is something almost nobody expected. Outside her former home at Kensington Palace, flowers began appearing. A few at first, then hundreds, then an entire carpet of them, stretching for what looked like miles down the street. People who never met her stood in the rain for hours, some overnight, crying like they'd lost a member of their own family. In some strange way, they had. She had let them see her pain so honestly, for so long, that millions of strangers felt like they'd known her their whole lives. An estimated 2.5 billion people around the world watched her funeral. It remains one of the most watched broadcasts in human history. Her sons walked behind her coffin through the streets of London. Two young boys, 12 and 15, watched by the entire world on the worst day of their lives. Prince William has said that walking behind that coffin, in front of that many cameras, is something he still carries with him decades later. Prince Harry has spent years since, in his own way, trying to protect his own family from the same kind of attention that took his mother, a thread you can still see clearly in the choices he's made as an adult. Diana never got to grow old. She never got to see her sons become husbands, fathers, men who now carry forward parts of what she started. William's own work with mental health and conservation. Harry's continued fight against the very kind of press intrusion that chased his mother into that tunnel. But almost 30 years later, her name still stops conversations in a room. Her handwriting still sells for thousands at auction. Her old sweaters still sell out online in minutes. Not because of what she wore, but because of what she stood for. A princess who refused to hide her pain and used it, again and again, to sit beside people the world had already looked away from. Maybe that's why she's still remembered the way she is. Not as a fairy tale, not as a tragedy, but as a woman who was given a crown and spent her whole life trying to be something more honest than that. If her story moved you, let me know in the comments which moment stayed with you the longest. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. There's another one waiting for you right here.